right. Well, welcome Hutto Bible Church, our church family. And this is part of your church staff. And today we're looking at Psalm 94 and Psalm 95. And today for this group time, we're just going to look at Psalm 95 and a couple questions I have as we read this. The first question is, when you look at Psalm 95, what does this tell us about God? You know, we asked that question kind of in our devotional material, that we should be looking as the primary question in any of our devotional times. What does this teach me about God? And so what does Psalm 95 teach y'all about God?
What comes to my mind is just how great God is and how worthy He is to be worshipped. I was reading a article from Desiring God earlier this week, and in it, Piper says he thinks that that's our biggest problem, that we don't understand the greatness of God. That's our biggest problem, because if we truly understood the greatness of God, it would solve so many of our other sin problems that we have, that we don't fully comprehend it.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good.
I think to go with that too, am I muted? No. Okay. To go with that, verse 7, when he says, "For he is our God and we are the people of his pasture, and the sheep of his hand." It's, to Janine's point, our God is great and our God is big. And that's something that I think we, like Janine and Piper both say, we miss. We tend to belittle our God, just in the way that we think about him. And so we have this big, great, powerful, sovereign king, and yet he is he's personal, like with his people. Like he cares for us in a really personal, intimate way, like a pastor or a shepherd leading his flock. So I love that we have a big God who's deeply involved in each of our lives in an intimate way.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, same thing. Like, you get this idea reading about God that he's above it all, like he's the King of all kings and he's creator. He holds everything in his hand, the mountains and the seas and everything. Like, he's so infinitely powerful. He has all power under heaven and earth, and then, but yeah, like a shepherd, like he's among his flock, like he's going to go after the one that's lost. Like, he'll leave the 99 to go after the one that's lost. So yeah, it's just so striking how powerful he is, and then yet how personal he is with us.
Yeah, I think, of course, I have two questions. The first one is, what does this tell us about God? The second one is, how should we worship this God? I think if we answer the first one, if we really mind that one, then the second one is, it's not just easy, it's natural. It fits. It's appropriate, because, like, when it says, let us come into his presence with thanksgiving, let us make joyful noise to him with songs of praise. That's verse 2. It says then, for the Lord is a great God. And then all the stuff that, Doug just said, he is the owner of everything and the maker of everything and the giver of everything. Well, I think thankfulness will come naturally. It should, when you realize that everything that you have has been given to you by God. Like, he's the giver of everything, like the air that you breathe, the matter that makes up all the substance of the world. Like, God spoke that into existence. And without his sustaining power, it would not be. And so, well, you better be thankful, because, like, there's nothing you have that hasn't been given you. Like, it should just flow. So let's look at that second question. When you look at this psalm, which is all about worship, like, how does it tell us this great God that it explains that we should come into his presence with thanksgiving? What does it say worship should look like to a God that awesome?
Well, for me, the biggest thing was, it was towards the end of the chapter. talking about having a softened heart, or don't let your heart be hardened. And I've had seasons of my life where my heart's been hardened and I haven't been able to really worship God. And it was just, so first for me would be soften your heart, ask the Holy Spirit to do that in you. And that way you can sing with joy and worship. So, and be thankful.
That's so good. In fact, to me, that just jumps off the page for me too, Jamie, because after explaining how awesome God is and what worship looks like, it just kind of throws that in. Like, it almost seems like it doesn't fit, but it does fit when you understand our heart.
Right.
Because you read this and you think, well, I mean, a God this amazing, well, who wouldn't worship him? Well, all of us wouldn't worship him, because it says today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. Because we would tend to, even seeing God this great and hearing his voice, we would tend to harden our hearts. Like, what is wrong with us? It's because we're sinners.
Yeah, that's exactly what stood out to me too. I mean, and the Bible mentions this multiple times, which tells us that it's a big problem. It's a common problem that, that we all have, that we know we should worship, but yet our hearts are hardened.
Doug, would you like to lead a worship service like this that's described in this?
Oh man, yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, I was just struck by all the instruction given for how to worship God, that we're supposed to sing and sing loudly. We're supposed to bow before our Maker. We're supposed to kneel before him. Like, those are some things described that we don't really do. Like, I see it happen occasionally, in our worship services, but it's super rare. And I think we should do it more often. I think we should let go of kind of that false sense of dignity sometimes we have when we're standing in church, kind of rigidly trying to worship, and not letting our guard down. And we need to let loose before God and lay our hearts bare before him, kneel before him, bow before him, go prostrate before him. And I know that's not the culture of many churches in America. It's kind of not even the culture of our church, but I want it to be more like that. I want to be more like that personally when I worship God. So it was convicting for me to read that and remember that.
Yeah, don't you think? I think we think a lot of times, I don't want to be a distraction in worship, and so if I lift my hands, or if I kneel, or if I don't want to be a distraction. And yet, how would that be a distraction? I mean, the people who would be a distraction to are already distracted, or they might be doing it themselves. Like, I think it would help people to sense that they are actually in the presence of God if they see brothers and sisters in Christ around them, kneeling or lifting their hands, or just standing there in silence, in awe before God, like they're on holy ground. Like,
absolutely.
I love like to Jamie's point and to Doug's point. It's a heart posture, right? I mean, I think what stood out to me in Psalm 95 is how I think the appropriate way to worship is to be responsive to who God is and what he's doing, and specifically like how he's speaking and working. Like, I love that verse 7 towards the end. It says, today, if you hear his voice, giving the indication that our God is a speaking God, that he's constantly working and speaking to his people. And a heart that is soft is a heart that is also listening, that is receptive of God as he's working and speaking. And I think the way we worship should be just a reflection of our hearts that have been softened, that have been purified. And so if as a church, we're worshiping, and someone in our body is excited, and that's kind of the appropriate response in the moment is joy, then I think our physical posture should reflect the posture of our hearts in that moment. Or like if it's an opportunity to be more reflective and somber, or not somber, that's not the right word, but reflective, and what's happening in our hearts is that we're bowing in humility, then I think it's okay for our physical posture to reflect the posture of our hearts in worship.
Yeah, for sure. I think about one moment in worship that I really think back to often, and it's just I think I was leading a worship song, and my precious sister Gabe, who's on the worship team, she was kind of standing off to this, next to me on stage or next to Taylor, and I just realized in my peripheral vision I couldn't see her anymore, and so I glanced over and Gabe was bowing before God, like on our stage. And that really impacted me because seeing that made me want to do the same thing. And I kind of couldn't because I was, playing
Holding a guitar,
leading the
you're
song.
so cool.
But I looked over and I just thought oh my goodness, I've never seen that in church before ever. And how appropriate that was, that she was doing that. And I just love that. I think back to that often. And I think that's why it's so important to worship together. It's what makes me miss worship, is that we miss out on moments like that.
Yeah, for sure. We've been saying in our intro videos that, worship is not something to be consumed. It's not something that we just come and watch. But, this psalm is such a beautiful picture of exactly what it's supposed to be. It's just an overflow of the worship that's already in your heart, of seeing God who he is, worshiping him in your heart, and it just overflows into a physical expression of that love and that awareness of who he is.
Psalm 95 is excellent and instructive to me because it this great God who delivered Israel was seen by everyone, but everyone didn't respond in the same way. So worship isn't simply seeing God for who he is, because at the last judgment, people are going to see God for who he is.
True.
But to me, it all turns on verse 2 where it says, we come into his presence with thanksgiving. Like the believer looks at God and sees him for who he is. And there's a heart response of, I cannot believe that he would want me, that he would forgive me, that he would extend grace to me, that I'm here, that I get to sing to him. And so everything else, this singing, this worship, this bow down, this kneeling, this obedience, all comes from that heart of thankfulness. In fact, I think I could make a good theological case for the fact that that worship flows from thankfulness, and that a hardened heart flows from unwilling to be thankful. Romans 1. They knew God, they saw God, and yet they were not thankful. And then all of the mess of Romans 1 flows out of that heart of ingratitude. And so I just think of in the coming weeks when we come up with a plan and are able to gather again, probably in smaller numbers, more distance from each other, in multiple services. I'm looking forward to what the worship will be like, not because the band will be amazing, but because we're all going to come together, and this thing that we have missed for weeks and weeks, getting to be in the same room with other believers, hearing truth and singing songs. I think we're all going to come with a greater thankfulness for this. It's, in a worldly sense, people are going to go to restaurants, in the coming weeks and be like, oh my gosh, this is the best meal I've ever had at Chipotle, this is just amazing. And there's going to be so thankful for that. But we have so much more to be thankful for when we get to come into the house of God again, in a sense, and be with his people. So, well, guys, thank you so much for sharing. Like I told you at the beginning of this, before we started recording, that, we read this together and look at it together. And as a result, we get so much more out of it, because this is the way it's supposed to work. We're supposed to be in community with other believers. And so church who is watching this, I would encourage you to do your own Zoom calls and your old dial-up calls and everything else, and call your friends and let them know what God is teaching you in His Word. So,
Yeah.
we love you, church.
Yeah, I love you guys.
Yeah. Bye.